Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight, we are coming to you from the Rising Bharat Summit in New Delhi. Network 18 is bringing together the top voices in politics, sports and entertainment. We're discussing the biggest issues of our times, from wars to climate change to artificial intelligence. You can catch all the sessions on our YouTube channel, also parts of some conversations on this show tonight. We're also bringing you news from across the world, including what's happening in the US election. What is the one thing that you need to fight elections? Public support, yes. Popularity, a good track record. You do need all of that. But one thing you cannot fight elections without is money. And it's a money game in the US as well. But Donald Trump may be running out of it. He may not have enough money to beat Biden. We'll tell you why donors are wary of Trump. Meanwhile, India is signing defense deals with the global south. It is sending weapons to Ethiopia and Guyana. In North Korea, Kim Jong-un is firing missiles again. We'll tell you why. In the UK, the NHS needs India's help. It is recruiting at least 2,000 doctors from India. Pakistan has a new battle tank called the Hedge. Why is it a problem? We'll discuss that. Also, how Abu Dhabi is trying to lure hedge fund managers. Why Nvidia is entering the humanoid robot race. And only 7 countries on earth breathe clean air. Why is that? We'll discuss that. The headlines first. China says the US has no right to interfere in the South China Sea. It comes after Antony Blinken said Washington will defend the Philippines against any attack. The South China Sea is a crucial trade route. Beijing claims almost the entire disputed waterway. The Indian Supreme Court refuses to stay the implementation of CAA, or the Citizenship Amendment Act. There are over 200 pleas challenging the law. The apex court gives the government 3 weeks to respond. The next hearing will be on the 9th of April. Fighting stops on the Afghan Pakistan border. The skirmishes started on Monday after Pakistani airstrikes in Afghanistan. Kabul responded by targeting Pakistan's border military posts. Since the Taliban seized power in 2021, border tensions between the two countries have escalated. Nigerian Army denies carrying out retaliatory attacks. On Monday, 16 soldiers were killed in the Delta state. Residents claim the troops targeted them and burnt a village in reprisal. The president has given the army a free hand to bring the killers to justice. And Lionel Messis fans to get a 50% refund for the Hong Kong fiasco. Many paid more than $100 to see the superstar in action on 4th February. But Messi remained on the bench, angering many fans. The refund will be given only to those who agree not to pursue legal action. How do you win elections? The obvious answer is public support, by getting more votes than your rival. But public support is not cheap. You need a lot of money to campaign, canvass and win. So it's not just the popular candidate who wins, it's also the better funded one. And why are we talking about this now? Because Donald Trump could be short of money. He's facing multiple legal challenges. One of them is putting the squeeze on him. Trump was accused of inflating the value of his assets. A New York court has found him guilty. He was asked, in fact, Trump was asked to cough up $355 million. If you add the interest to that, it's $464 million. Now, Donald Trump has 2 options. A, he can pay the amount in full, which means case closed. Or B, he can get an insurance company to guarantee the payment. Trump would then be free to appeal the verdict. Naturally, he likes option B. Trump wants insurance companies to cover his payments. Just one problem, though. None of them will. Trump's lawyers have approached 30 companies. All of them have refused. And why is that? Well, these companies want collateral. Think of it as a backup. A collateral can be any sort of asset, maybe cash reserves or stock or properties. If Donald Trump appeals and loses, these companies will take that collateral. Just one problem. In this case, they don't want real estate as collateral. They want cash or stocks. And looks like Trump does not have enough of it. His net worth is around $2.6 billion. Out of this, around $400 million is in liquid assets. But the insurers want more than $500 million as collateral. You can imagine how Trump is reacting to all of this. He's calling it a witch hunt. Donald Trump says the bond amount is unconstitutional and un-American. We'll have to wait and see what he does next. But our story goes beyond this case. It's about the money needed to win elections. In 2004, George Bush raised around $345 million for his campaign. In 2008, Barack Obama raised $750 million. In 2012, he raised $1.1 billion. In 2016, Trump also raised $1 billion. And in 2020, Biden did the same. So the takeaway is pretty clear. If you want to become America's president, you better have $1 billion in the bank. Now we come to the present election cycle. Biden versus Trump. Who holds the funding edge? Right now, the president is miles ahead. Biden's team has $130 million in the bank. That's cash ready to spend. How much does Trump have? Around $33 million. As president, Biden has a natural advantage. Every incumbent gets more money than his rival. Trump also did it in 2020. But this time around, there are two major problems. One is the legal bills. Trump is battling some 88 legal cases, so his lawyer's bill is huge. He spent $50 million on it last year. The second problem is small donors. These are people who give less than $200. Such small donors are abandoning Donald Trump. In 2019, they gave him $72 million. That's $72 million in 1 year. But in 2023, that number fell by 62%. And that's bad news for him, of course, because Trump is a disruptive candidate. Corporate America has always been wary of him. So small donors are his strength. If they abandon him, it could be trouble, which is why Trump is hunting for money. He met Elon Musk recently. I'm guessing campaign funding was discussed in that meeting. But either way, one thing is quite clear. If you don't have money, you cannot win America. Whether it's taking out TV ads or attack campaigns or jetting around one of the largest countries in the world, you need money for that. Of course, there is some good news. Until now, Republican money was being split into many camps. Nikki Haley was challenging Trump. She raised around $16 million in January. Now that she's gone, Trump has a clear path. He could consolidate Republican donors, but it won't be easy again, especially with the legal cases. Trump says presidents should have immunity. If they commit a crime in office, they shouldn't be prosecuted. But most of America disagrees. 70% voters say Trump should not have immunity. 48% Republicans say the same. So Trump's job is to convince his party first, to prove to them that he can beat these legal challenges. If not, donors will be wary. After all, they want their money to help elect the next president, not to pay some Manhattan lawyer's bill. Let's turn to India now. We've talked about India's plan to become a military exporter. But that requires an important step: identifying your market, figuring out who will buy your products. Looks like India has picked the global south. Reports say New Delhi is going to sign a defense deal with Ethiopia. It will focus on two areas. One is military training. The other is military acquisitions. You extend cheap loans to buyer countries. They will use that money to buy your weapons. Apparently, the talks are in the final stages. The agreement will be signed after India's elections. Another deal is with Guyana. India's Export-Import Bank has given a line of credit to Guyana. It is worth around $23 million. And what will this money be used for? To buy 2 Indian military planes, the HAL-228 Dornier aircraft. It's ideal for short takeoffs and landings. Apparently, that was a priority for Guyana. These planes will be used for a number of missions: to carry out patrols, to resupply military bases, and to move soldiers around. But Guyana is not done yet. They're also looking at Indian patrol vehicles and radars. That's 2 major deals, one in Africa, the other in the Caribbean. And there's a clear trend here. Global South countries like Indian military exports. I'll give you more examples. The Philippines has bought India's BrahMos missiles. It's a $375 million deal, and the deliveries are set to begin. Around 12 other countries are also interested. All of them are from the global South. Same with the Tejas fighter jet. India is also in talks with 6 nations about this. The list includes Nigeria, the Philippines, Argentina, and Egypt. Again, global South. And the numbers support India's mission. Look at the value of defense exports in 2017-18, around 4,600 crore rupees. Now it's almost 15,000 crores. That's a rise of 226%. And the government's target is much bigger, to reach 50,000 crore in exports by 2028-29, basically to become a top defense supplier. The Global South can help India reach there, which again raises two questions. One, why do these countries prefer India? And two, how does it help New Delhi? For starters, India is part of the same club. It is a Global South country itself. Plus, there is no colonial stigma, no fears of buying strategic assets from your former colonizers. That's always an advantage. But the biggest draw is the price. Western jets and missiles are very expensive. Indian ones are more affordable, yet lethal. And the reason is quite simple. India faces the same pressures as these buyers. It has to spend a lot on social welfare. At the same time, it cannot ignore defense spending, which is very different from the West. There, the idea is to throw money at a military problem. Just consider America's F-35 jet. A few hundred of those planes will cost $1.7 trillion. That's purchase plus operate plus sustain. $1.7 trillion. It's unthinkable for the Global South. Now we come to the second question. What's in it for India? The obvious gain is the money. More defense exports equals more revenue. More revenue equals more investments and jobs. So India can build a robust defense industry. But equally important is building strategic ties. When you sell weapons, you become partners. Just look at India and Russia. The root of that relationship is weapons. So New Delhi must try and replicate that with the Global South. These countries already look up to India. A defense partnership will lock things up. Will it be easy? Of course not. China has a head start in this industry, especially in Africa. They've signed 27 loan deals with 8 nations. Put together, it's worth $3.5 billion, and all these deals cover defense. So it's going to be a massive challenge. And the West won't give up its foothold easily. China won't let India take the lead. So New Delhi should be ready for a tough fight here. Now let's turn our attention to the Korean Peninsula. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Seoul. He is there to participate in a summit for democracy. Now, this is the third such summit. The first was held in 2021. These summits are US President Joe Biden's pet project. He had promised to establish them during his presidential campaign in 2020. The first 2 summits were held online. This is the third summit, and South Korea is going out of its way to ensure that it's a success. Fervent media coverage, grand speeches, especially about the dangers of technology.
As authoritarian and repressive regimes deploy technologies to undermine democracy and human rights, we need to ensure that technology sustains and supports democratic values and norms.
Blinken says the US will roll out guidelines for tech companies to help them curb attacks on human rights defenders.
Today, we're releasing first-of-its-kind guidance to give technology companies the tools to help prevent, mitigate, and seek justice for attacks on human rights defenders online. We're protecting access to a free and open internet.
But amid these speeches and the fanfare in Seoul, another spectacle is taking place on the Korean Peninsula, courtesy Kim Jong-un. North Korean state media has released this footage. It shows a leather jacket-wearing Kim directing a missile test. They're calling them super large rocket launcher drills. And Kim seems to be calling the shots here. The footage shows 6 missiles being fired simultaneously, like a lethal choreographed fireworks display. Photographs show an overjoyed Kim Jong-un pointing excitedly at where the missiles landed. He's clearly enjoying this. And North Korea often does this. They keep launching rockets to irk the South. They launched some missiles over the weekend as well. What better time than when Blinken is in town, right? It's an insult to both the South and its biggest ally, the US. Clearly, Kim enjoys riling up his opponents. And not just with missile tests, in other ways too. The Summit for Democracy is for criticizing authoritarians. So what does Kim do? He releases a video of himself driving around in a Russian limousine, a gift from Russian President Vladimir Putin. The North Korean leader's sister, Kim Yo-jong, said that this was a statement. She said it was clear proof that the Russia-North Korea friendship was reaching new heights. Not exactly the news the Democracy Summit attendees want to hear. South Korea is bristling at Kim's antics.
We welcome dialogue with North Korea, but our government maintains a firm policy of holding North Korea accountable if it makes a wrong decision.
Another Western ally in the region is also fuming, and that's Japan. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida was clearly annoyed because the weekend missiles landed close to Japan's waters.
We will do our utmost to collect and analyze information as well as monitor the situation and work closely with the United States and South Korea.
So the Triple Alliance is planning to crack down on North Korea. But after a point, they have to realize that they're not making any real difference. The allies keep engaging in military drills, regular shows of force, and Kim just responds by launching more missiles. It's a waste of taxpayer money, really. And pointless, because Kim is not going to back down. They should either find an effective way to subdue him or stop with the fist shaking, because their current approach is clearly not working, and no amount of democracy summits can cover up that failure. Now to the UK, where the NHS is in a critical condition and looking at India to rescue it. The NHS wants Indian doctors, at least 2,000 of them, to keep the health system from collapsing. A quick primer first. NHS stands for National Health Service. It's a publicly funded healthcare system. It caters to all UK citizens. The NHS was established in 1948. It was a major social reform after the Second World War. And this service offers cradle-to-grave coverage. You can have a baby, you can go visit a doctor, you can get an operation done, all for no cost. Of course, it's not truly free. It's funded by the taxpayers' money, so you do pay up. For decades, the NHS was a crown jewel for the UK. But now it's broken. Training is expensive and the burnout is high due to heavy workload. In 2022, 100,000 posts were empty in the NHS. That's 1 in every 10 nursing positions and 1 in every 17 doctors' jobs. So staff shortage is rampant. Waiting time to see a doctor is as long as 1 month in some hospitals. You have to wait for a month to see a doctor. More than 7 million people are on a hospital waiting list in the UK. That is 1 in 8 people in the UK. Meanwhile, NHS doctors are striking. They want more compensation. They want better wages. So it's a truly chaotic situation. And what is the UK doing about it? Hoping to get doctors from other places, like India. The NHS will recruit at least 2,000 doctors from India. They must have 3 basic qualifications: primary medical education, basic proficiency in English, and recognition by the UK's General Medical Council. The process will be fast-tracked. Once they reach the UK, the NHS will train them. It's a postgraduate training exercise. It will be for 6 to 12 months. Once that is over, they will be deployed to hospitals. So it's going to be fairly simple. No other exams, no additional training programs. And this is not the first time they're doing this, not the first time the NHS has wooed Indian doctors. They've done it before. In 2016, doctors were flown from India to Britain, again to deal with staff shortage. Plus, NHS has a long history of relying on doctors from overseas. 25 to 30% of its workforce includes non-UK trained doctors. The question is why? Why can't the NHS find doctors in the UK? And the reason is funding cuts. In 2008, the world reeled from a financial crisis and the UK too suffered. So in 2010, the government introduced austerity measures. There were budget cuts across the board. It also meant lesser funds for the NHS. It left their budget short by more than $28 billion. And since then, it has only gone from bad to worse. There's soaring inflation, high energy costs, Brexit complicating matters, and an aging population that does not help. So it's the perfect crisis. Salaries have not kept up with the growing inflation, which means doctors no longer join the NHS. They prefer greener pastures, like practicing overseas. A lot of them go to Australia and the UAE. Those who stay face grim prospects. They work longer hours and they're unable to take breaks, which explains the recent strikes. The NHS is now getting doctors from abroad. But that can only be a stopgap arrangement. It is not a permanent solution. Every year, the UK spends 10% of its GDP on health. Yet health inequality is rising. In 2022, the daily NHS running costs topped $236 billion. 40% of that went to staffing, and that includes wages. Yet doctors and nurses in the NHS have been working for the bare minimum. People have to wait for months for cancer treatment. Since 2020, over 200,000 people have not received life-saving surgery. So the NHS really needs a rejig. It pioneered the cradle-to-grave coverage, but can it really afford to provide everything for free? The policymakers in London will have to address this question sooner rather than later. So India is helping the UK save lives. Meanwhile, China is helping Pakistan look tough, sort of. Pakistan has a new main battle tank. They're calling it the Hedge. But that's an eyewash. The tank is actually a rebranded Chinese model, the VT-4. Pakistan wanted hundreds of these VT-4s, but surprise, surprise, China has sent them faulty equipment. So to save face, Pakistan began assembling them at home. I suppose it's better to screw it up yourself than have the Chinese do it for you. The self-assembled tanks are being called the Hedge, and now they have self-inflicted flaws. Our next report has the details.
Pakistan's army held a grand ceremony recently. Their Chief of Army Staff, General Asim Munir, was the guest of honor. In attendance were some top officials from China, including the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. There were also officials from the Chinese defense firm Norinco. All of them had gathered for the unveiling of a tank. The Hedge main battle tank. Pakistan says this is a proud moment. A leap forward in indigenous tank development. But is that really the case? Let's take a closer look at the Hedge. It is operated by a crew of 3, a driver, a commander and a gunner. The main weapon is a 125mm smoothbore main gun. It can fire armor-piercing rounds, high-explosive rounds and anti-tank guided missiles. Other than this, the tank has a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun up front and a 12.7mm heavy machine gun mounted at the rear of the commander hatch. This is standard for any modern tank, but Pakistan is, of course, proud of having reached universal benchmarks. The tank is powered by a 1,200 horsepower diesel engine. It can reach a top speed of 70 kilometers per hour. And it has an operational range of about 500 kilometers. Now, all this seems fine at first glance. It shows a defense industry on the rise, working to become self-sufficient. But take a step back. This is Pakistan we're talking about. Of course there's something suspicious. You figure that out when you look a little deeper into the Hedge's history. First off, the tank was never meant to be indigenous. It was supposed to be an import. The Hedge is actually the Chinese VT-4 main battle tank. It's an export version of China's own tanks. Export here meaning inferior. China had signed a deal with Pakistan in 2017. They were going to provide Islamabad with about 300 VT-4s. But when the first few tanks arrived, flaws were uncovered. China had sent tanks with faulty armor. The dimensions of some tank parts were incorrect, and problems were discovered during field firing trials. So, what was Pakistan to do? They couldn't scrap the deal. They had sunk in a lot of money already, and that's a big deal for the cash-strapped nation. So, the army decided to hoodwink the public instead. Pakistan signed a licensing agreement with Norinco, the company that makes VT-4s. The tanks would be assembled in Pakistan instead, with most parts coming in from China, like the engine and other components, but some smaller components are modified in Pakistan. Not exactly a big win for local defense manufacturing. These tanks are now saddled with makeshift Pakistani parts, along with their inherent Chinese problems, like relatively weak armor compared to most modern main battle tanks. Talk about taking the worst of both worlds. Pakistan insists on painting this as a win, but the country's rivals shouldn't be overly worried. The Hedge looks like just another Pakistani gimmick.
Our next story comes from Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates, home to about 1.4 million people and an array of tourist attractions. But some would say Abu Dhabi's most interesting attraction is its money. A sovereign wealth fund worth $1.5 trillion, one of the biggest in the world. And the city is milking it to lure hedge fund titans from across the world. It is offering hedge fund managers a range of unusual perks, from country club memberships to elite school admissions for their children. Is this Abu Dhabi's bid to become a financial hub, and will it work? Here's a report.
The richest emirate in the Gulf is counting on getting richer. We're talking about Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates. It's rolling out the red carpet for hedge fund titans. Officials are formalizing a program for hedge fund managers. Think of it as a package of perks tailored to lure in the big money makers. And the incentives range widely, from lifestyle support and visas to admissions in elite schools and even memberships at country clubs. So anything goes, as long as the finance professionals move to Abu Dhabi. And chances are that's exactly what would happen. The perks will ensure a smooth onboarding. But more than that, Abu Dhabi itself is a big draw. Rather, the city's sovereign wealth capital is. It's valued at $1.5 trillion. It's one of the biggest sovereign capital funds in the world, enough to catch the attention of any big hedge fund manager. On top of this, Abu Dhabi saw a quick post-COVID economic rebound. It offers a relative ease of doing business, a neutral political stance, a relatively low rate of crime, and a time zone that allows workers to trade across European, American, and Asian hours. On top of this, Abu Dhabi is part of a country that loves the rich. In today's climate, few countries welcome the wealthy. In most nations, billionaires often come under scrutiny. But the UAE does not vilify capitalism. That, combined with other factors, makes its capital a giant appeal for the rich. And the city hopes it remains that way. Actually, Abu Dhabi is betting on it. But why? Why is the city offering unlikely perks to finance professionals? In simple terms, to get even richer. Abu Dhabi has set its sights on an ambitious goal. It hopes to become one of the world's biggest financial centers and draw professionals from the likes of New York, London, Hong Kong, and Singapore. The question is, will the plan work? If we are to believe the signs, it could. Let's take a look at the Abu Dhabi Global Market, or ADGM. This is Abu Dhabi's financial center. As of last year, it had 1,825 operational entities. That's a 32% growth from 2022. It had 102 asset managers as well, managing 141 funds. Today, ADGM is the fastest growing financial center in the region. Plus, top global financial firms are opening offices in Abu Dhabi, the likes of Goldman Sachs, Rothschild & Co. and Morgan Stanley. So things are going well for the city. But there is one hurdle: competition. Abu Dhabi is competing with two financial hubs in the neighborhood: Dubai, which is a short car ride away, and Riyadh, which can be easily accessed via short flights. And these two competitors have been in the game for longer. For instance, these three big names may have set up base in Abu Dhabi, but they've been in Dubai for years, where their finance professionals are most likely paying their own club fees from the big money that they've been generating for years. So before Abu Dhabi tries to overtake financial mammoths like New York and London, its first big challenge lies in its own neighborhood. Only time will tell if this city of islands can be a financial island unto itself.
Our next story is from West Africa. It's about America's failed policy in Niger. Niger is a country of about 25 million people. It is located in West Africa in the so-called coup belt. Niger experienced a coup last July. The military ousted and imprisoned President Mohamed Bazoum. A junta has ruled the country since. They say they took over for two reasons. One, to better fight a terrorist insurgency in the region, and two, to remove French troops from their country. You see, France was Niger's former colonial overlord. It was very unpopular in the country, so when the junta took power, the French were forced to leave. But France was not the only foreign power in the country. There was also an EU and American force based in Niger. They were there to fight terrorists as well. When the junta took over, the Europeans packed up, but the Americans stayed. They moved out of Niger's capital, Niamey, but about 1,000 American troops are stationed at a base near the city of Agadez. It's called Air Base 201. The base houses a fleet of MQ-9 Reaper drones. It was built about 6 years ago at a cost of about $110 million. This base was used for anti-terror operations, which have stopped since the coup in July, but the American troops have stuck around, sometimes engaging in self-defense operations, but mostly they've been on standby. But now it seems that the American soldiers will have to pack up.
The government of Niger, taking into account the aspirations and interests of its people, resolves in all responsibility to denounce with immediate effect the agreement relating to the status of United States military personnel and civilian employees of the U.S. Department of Defense on the territory of the Republic of Niger.
Yes, Niger's junta wants the Americans out. It seems that Washington's plans in the region are in a shambles, and it's completely their fault, maybe add. It could have still worked out for the U.S. had they refrained from their old habits, condescension and threats.
The government of Niger therefore strongly denounces the condescending attitude combined with the threat of reprisals by the head of the American delegation against the government and the people of Niger.
Last week, an American delegation went to Niger. It included Assistant Secretary of State Molly Fee, Assistant Secretary of Defense Celeste Wallander, and the U.S. Africa Command's General Michael Langley. This high-level delegation sat down with the Niger junta and proceeded to chastise them. It's no secret that Niger has swapped France for Russia. Russia's Wagner mercenary group joined Niger's fight against terror. This was just weeks after the French were asked to leave. Last December, Niger's junta-appointed Prime Minister was also in Moscow. They were talking about expanding ties, which is natural given the situation. But it's not just the Russian ties that have irked the U.S. Niger's Prime Minister has visited Iran as well. He was there in January. And that was perhaps the last straw for the Americans. The U.S. delegation confronted Niger last week. They accused the junta of trying to sell uranium to Tehran. You heard that right. The U.S. says they're planning to help Iran develop nuclear weapons. Niger's junta has slammed this accusation.
The government of Niger rejects the misleading allegations made by the head of the American delegation, who maintains that it had signed a secret uranium agreement with the Islamic Republic of Iran. This cynical approach, usually used to discredit, demonize, and justify their threats against states, is reminiscent of the Second Iraq War.
And that seems to have been the final straw. That's when Niger said that they want the U.S. military out. It's not final yet. The U.S. is now scrambling to undo the damage and to keep a hold of its $100 million base. But it shows just how tactless the Americans can be. They could have just laid low and gone about their business, but no. They thought it was smart to bully a smaller country, and this time it has backfired spectacularly. Our next story is about humanoid robots. They're on the rise, and I do not mean a Terminator-like scenario. It's just that more prototypes are coming out, and most tech companies want a piece of the pie. The latest one to join the race is Nvidia, the chip maker. On Tuesday, it announced something called Project Groot, an obvious reference to Marvel's speaking tree. But the project has nothing to do with sentient plants. Groot stands for Generalist Robot 00 Technology. It's a general-purpose foundation model. Robots built on this platform can understand language, mimic motions, and learn coordination and dexterity. In simpler words, they will behave like humans. Our next report tells you why humanoid robots are the new frontier.
It can climb stairs, it can open doors, it can use tools, it can lift boxes, it can even make dinner. I'm not talking about a butler. I'm talking about a humanoid robot. They are coming of age. And don't worry, it's not as bad as the Terminator. They won't try to kill you. Instead, they want to make your lives easier. Humanoid robots are fully functioning AI-driven robots. In a decade, they could be staffing warehouses, manning retail stores, and tending to the elderly, and even perform household chores. Basically, we could all be Richie Rich with our own personal Irona. But building them isn't an easy task. They're not only difficult to build, but also very expensive to engineer. Tesla has one. It's called the Optimus humanoid robot. OpenAI has collaborated with a startup called Figure to build one. Agility Robotics has one called Digit. It's aiming to use it for warehouse work. Mercedes has Apptronic's Apollo. It will be used in the car factories. So robot fever is everywhere. But what's powering these human-like robots? Well, it's AI models, and Nvidia has joined that race. It has unveiled Project Groot. No, it's not Marvel's speaking tree. Groot refers to Generalist Robot 00 technology. It's a general-purpose foundation model for humanoid robots. Robots built on the platform are quick to adopt human skills. They can learn languages, mimic movements, learn coordination and dexterity, and even interact in the real world. Nvidia is already working with most humanoid robot companies, the likes of Agility Robotics, Apptronic, Boston Dynamics, Figure AI. One notable exception, though, is Tesla. Nvidia will collaborate with these companies to build a comprehensive AI platform, one that can power human-like robots. Humanoid robots are the new frontier of technology, but it's a highly contentious topic. Venture capitalists are pouring millions into investments, but many remain skeptical of its scope. Of course, we're still far away from a perfect model. For example, like C-3PO from Star Wars. Humanoid robots are decades away from replicating what humans are capable of, but the industry is only growing. In the next 10 years, it could be a $6 billion industry.
My name is Amaka.
That means the opportunities are plenty, and tech companies all want a piece of that pie.
What do most countries have in common? According to the World Health Organization, unsafe air. The WHO recently conducted a study. It analyzed air pollution across 134 nations and regions, and it came to a disturbing and shameful conclusion. Only 7 countries on Earth breathe clean air. Australia, Estonia, Finland, Grenada, Iceland, Mauritius, and New Zealand. Only 7. All other nations breathe toxic air, some more than others, like Asian and African nations, with Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India leading the pack. So what's behind this? And what does this mean for our world? Our next report tells you.
Human beings have certain basic needs. They need 4 major things to survive: food, water, shelter, and air. If even one of these things is threatened, it becomes difficult to lead a healthy life. And that's exactly what is happening. Our 4th need, the air we breathe, is under threat. Air pollution is the world's leading environmental cause of death. It kills about 7 million people every year the world over. This is more than the deaths from AIDS and malaria combined. Because across the world, most countries breathe unsafe air. There are only 7 outliers: Australia, Estonia, Finland, Grenada, Iceland, Mauritius, and New Zealand. These are the few oases of safe air. As disturbing as this is, we aren't making this up. The World Health Organization says so. It studied air pollution levels across 134 nations and regions and found that all but 7 nations have toxic air. But they don't suffer equally. The worst air quality is mostly in Asia and Africa, ironically where the vast majority of human population lives. And who leads the pack? These are the 5 most polluted countries in the world: Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Tajikistan, and Burkina Faso. In Bangladesh, the pollution is 15 times higher than the WHO guideline. In Pakistan, it is more than 14 times higher, and in India, more than 10 times higher. But remember, this is an average. The deeper you dig, the worse it gets. So the World Health Organization did not just study nations, it also focused on cities. 7,800 cities were analyzed globally. A list of 100 cities with the worst air pollution was prepared. Of all these names, 99 cities with the worst air pollution on Earth are in one continent, Asia, and 83 of them are in one country, India. Which is the most polluted city in the world? Begusarai in the state of Bihar. It is home to 500,000 people. and air pollution that is 23 times the WHO guideline, followed by Guwahati in Assam and the capital city of New Delhi. Now, India is not the only country in a smoggy spot. So is its neighbor, China. In 2014, Beijing announced a war against pollution. It made substantial progress, but after years of improvement, China saw a 6.3% increase in pollution levels in 2023. Why? Because China saw an uptick in economic reopening last year post-COVID. At least that's the reason China cited. What about other countries? What's behind their soaring air pollution levels? In Asia and Africa, vehicle traffic, crop and wood burning are some of the big reasons. In North America, it's wildfires. But there's one major reason which can be blamed the world over: fossil fuel emissions. This is the biggest contributor to air pollution. It causes 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. Yet, despite all the research and roundtables, a solution to air pollution has not found its seat at the table. So, billions of people have no choice but to breathe toxic air daily.
So climate action is the need of the hour, and that was the theme of the conversation I had today at the Rising Bharat Summit. It was about Earth's dividend, about choosing between protecting the planet and profits. Can countries do both, or should they prioritize one? Here's a snippet from that conversation. Amina, Gharib Fakim, your thoughts on what India is doing, and countries like India, even China, have developmental requirements. Same with Mauritius. As the president, I'm sure you've seen this firsthand, the challenges that climate change poses to you and your people. So you have to find a way to balance the two. How do you think these countries are doing?
First of all, I just pick up to what Eric has just said. The approach that the global south and India, Asia, of course, and China, I think the approach is that we are very much part of the ecosystem and that we need to start respecting nature, and the solutions will be, of course, in nature. But you mentioned something about the challenges of climate and how India and in most Asian countries, even China, are tackling. I think the plan is there. There is a game plan to address this. I think many of the rising emerging economies, of course, India is one of them, they have a plan. But I have a but. We are all integrated in the global economy. And this, of course, is the lifeblood of any country, is to see to it that trade increases so that jobs can be created. And my concern is that because of the competition, because of the moving geotectonic plates around the world, especially now that India and China are rising, is that there could be a break to this rise. And the break will come because when we start tying down trade to the climate. It's a good point, but there is a downside to it. It can become a break. I mean, also have to bring in Africa, because this is where I hail from, is that there will be a tendency to link up trade to cleaner technologies. And those countries that haven't played catch up, they will find big problems in terms of precisely benchmarking themselves to that level to see to it that trade happens. And that, what I fear, will be the tendency moving forward. And I think this is where I think India, I'm sure, is already mindful of the way that she's going to progress in the future, because India is set to become, of course, now we are 5th, is going to be, of course, higher in the ranking of emerging economies. So this is something that has to be borne in mind.
You mentioned the debate on who is going to take responsibility, and that also brings us to the point of historical responsibility, and there are countries that have contributed more to emissions. Do you think that's a valid point that the global south makes, and do you feel let down by rich countries that do not put their money where their mouth is?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the continent of Africa, it has been less than 3% in terms of global emission. The global north has been 25% as we speak. There has been an initiative to capitalize the fund, and here I make a pledge for more funds for adaptation. And where we are falling short is that the needs of the global south, excluding China, is $1 trillion per year. And I don't see any country or any institution that is able to actually match and bring forward this amount of fund. So this will be the race. And again, the 100 billion which has come on board since Paris hasn't been capitalized. We still have a gap. And if you look at 100 billion in the world global economy of 100 trillion, it's not a lot. But I don't see the will or the appetite to take this risk to help poorer countries adapt. And this is where we are failing, because the future of the world will depend on the growth in the global south. And of course, the prosperity in global south matters. If you take one item like immigration, we find that how much this is impacting, of course, the global north and, of course, the global south economies.
You make interesting points. And you were telling me earlier that you believe that Indian culture is the best suited for climate action. Do you want to tell our audience about that?
Sorry,
Indian culture, you said, is better suited.
Look, the old Brits had, to put it mildly, very unfavorable view of the Hindu Dharma, or the traditional Indian culture. They saw it as a second-rate religion with any number, millions of gods, didn't take it seriously at all. Then switched to 2024, and Hindu Dharma looks like the most modern of all religions. Why? Because, look, in Christianity, while there is a strong drive to protect nature in Christianity, still the perspective is always that the human being is superior. Human being is superior to nature. While in Hindu Dharma, man is part of nature. Man is in nature. And that now looks such a modern perspective. And the old Indians, they venerated nature. They did it even to the extent of making God half animal, half human. I mean, Ganesh, half elephant, half human, Hanuman, half monkey, half human. And can there be a stronger signal of the unity of man, humans, and nature than making God half nature, half human? So what the Brits spoke so negatively about 100 years ago is now looking as the most modern of all global thought systems.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Argentina, police clash with protesters in Buenos Aires over protests against President Javier Milei. In Russia, 13 miners remain trapped inside a gold mine after a rock fall. And Britain's Royal Mint launches a new Star Wars coin. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day in the year 2003. The U.S. invaded Iraq to oust dictator Saddam Hussein. The U.S. said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Washington called it a threat to international peace. 461,000 people died during the war. It cost the U.S. $3 trillion, but no weapons of mass destruction were found. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.